I was pouring my morning coffee when I heard the sharp knock on my door that would mark the beginning of 3 months of absolute hell in Riverside Estates, California. Standing on my porch was Patricia Henderson, our HOA president, flanked by 2 board members I vaguely recognized from the quarterly meetings I usually skipped. Patricia was 52, with that particular haircut that seemed to be issued along with HOA presidency, blonde highlights perfectly arranged, her lips pressed into a thin line of disapproval. "Mr. Chen," she said, not waiting for me to invite her in, "we need to discuss your recent violations." I blinked, still processing the caffeine deficit. "Violations?" She thrust a manila folder at me, thick with papers. "Multiple infractions. Your mailbox is the wrong shade of black. Your lawn exceeds the maximum height by half an inch. And your trash cans were visible from the street last Tuesday at 7:15 in the morning." I stared at the folder, then at her. "Trash pickup is at 7:30. Where exactly am I supposed to hide them? That's not our concern. The CC and Articus are clear." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "This is your official warning. The fines start next week if you don't comply. Have a good day." They left before I could formulate a response, and I stood there holding 20 pages of citations for things I didn't even know could be violations. I'd lived in Riverside Estates for 2 years without incident. My house was neat, my yard maintained, I didn't throw parties or make noise. I was the definition of an invisible neighbor. That afternoon, I walked down to my mailbox to examine it. It was black. Maybe slightly faded from the California sun, but black. I pulled out my phone and checked the HOA guidelines I'd signed when I bought the house. "Mailboxes must be black or dark bronze," mine qualified. The lawn thing was ridiculous too. We were in a drought, and I'd kept it exactly at the recommended height to conserve water. Something was wrong. I decided to attend the next HOA meeting, scheduled for that Thursday evening. I'd never been to one before, always figured they were just boring administrative stuff. The community center was fuller than I expected, maybe 30 people scattered across folding chairs. Patricia sat at a table up front with 4 other board members. I recognized Tom Bradshaw, a retired accountant who lived 3 streets over. There was Margaret Liu, a lawyer who I'd chatted with once at the community pool. Then Daniel Foster, who owned the biggest house in the development. And finally, Karen Westbrook, who I'd heard complaining about various neighbors at the grocery store more times than I could count. Karen was exactly what you'd picture. Mid-40s, shoulder-length brown hair with aggressive lowlights, the kind of woman who asks to speak to managers as a hobby. She was Patricia's closest ally, nodding along to everything the president said. The meeting droned on through budget reports and landscaping contracts. Then Patricia cleared her throat. "Now, we need to address problem properties. We've had several complaints about homes not maintaining community standards." She clicked a remote, and a projector lit up with photos. My stomach dropped. They were all pictures of my house. My mailbox zoomed in to show slight fading, my lawn with what looked like measurement markers edited in, my trash cans time-stamped. "This property has received multiple violations," Patricia continued. "The owner has been unresponsive to our attempts at dialogue." "Wait," I said, standing up, every head turned. "I just got that folder this morning, and I'm right here." Patricia's expression flickered with annoyance. "Mr. Chen, this is not the time for individual disputes. You just put my house on a projector in front of 30 people. When is the time?" Margaret Liu leaned forward. "Patricia, when were the violations issued?" "This morning," Patricia admitted, "but we've been monitoring the property for weeks." "Then how can you say he's been unresponsive?" Margaret's lawyer instincts were kicking in, I could see it. Karen jumped in. "The point is there are violations. Whether he responds or not doesn't change the facts." I kept my voice level. "My mailbox meets the guidelines. It says black or dark bronze. Mine is black. And my lawn is exactly 2 inches, which is what the county recommended for drought conditions." Tom Bradshaw pulled out his own copy of the CC and Articus. "He's right. The guidelines specify black or dark bronze. They don't mention a specific shade or require regular repainting. Patricia's jaw tightened. The spirit of the rule is clear. Mailboxes should look uniform and well-maintained. But that's not what the rule says, Tom replied. We can't enforce rules based on spirit. We need specific written standards. The meeting devolved into argument. Half the room seemed to think Patricia was overreaching. The other half, led by Karen's loud insistence that standards exist for a reason, supported her. When it finally ended an hour later, I felt exhausted. I caught up with Tom in the parking lot. Thanks for backing me up in there. He shook his head. Something's off. Patricia's never been this aggressive before. She's usually pretty reasonable. You've been on the board, what, 5 years? 6. And I'm telling you this isn't normal. He hesitated. Be careful. I don't know what's going on, but she's got Karen completely on her side, and Daniel usually goes along with whatever Patricia wants because he doesn't pay attention. That's 3 votes out of 5. I drove home with that warning echoing in my head. The next morning, another knock. This time it was Karen with a clipboard and a measuring tape. I'm conducting a property inspection, she announced. Do I have to let you? She smiled sweetly. The CC and Articus grant the board access to all properties for inspection purposes with 24 hours notice. You're giving me notice now for an inspection now? I sent an email yesterday at 9 a.m. Check your inbox. I pulled out my phone. Sure enough, buried in spam, there was an email from the HOA with inspection notice in the subject line. I'd never gotten HOA emails before because I'd never given them my email address. Where did you get my email? The county property records list it. She pushed past me into my yard, measuring tape in hand. For the next 20 minutes, she measured everything. The distance from my house to the property line. The height of my fence. The width of my driveway. She took dozens of photos, making notes on her clipboard after each one. Your fence is 1 inch too tall, she finally declared. I looked at the fence I'd inherited from the previous owner. It's been here for 10 years. Then it's been a violation for 10 years. You have 2 weeks to remedy it or face fines of $100 per day. She left, and I stood there wondering if I'd accidentally moved into a prison camp instead of a housing development. That weekend, I did what I should have done from the start: research. I pulled every document from my home purchase, read through all 70 pages of CC and Articus, and started going through HOA meeting minutes posted online. That's when I found it. 3 months ago, there'd been a vote to expand the community gym. It needed 70% approval from homeowners. It failed, getting only 42%. Patricia had been pushing that gym expansion for 2 years. She'd promised better amenities, higher property values, a sense of community. I scrolled through the voting records, which were public. I'd voted no. So had about 60 other households. We didn't need a bigger gym, we needed to fix the actual problems. The community pool that leaked, the street lights that stayed dark, the playground equipment that hadn't been updated since the development was built in 2008. I kept digging. There was a resident forum, barely moderated, where people posted complaints and comments. Someone named Sarah M. had written, Patricia is making a list of everyone who voted against the gym. She said in the board chat that they're not team players. I screenshot everything. Monday morning, I called Margaret Liu. She agreed to meet me for coffee at a place off the main boulevard, away from the neighborhood. I think Patricia is targeting me because of how I voted, I said, sliding my phone across the table with the screenshots. Margaret studied them, her expression growing serious. Do you know who Sarah M. is? No idea, Sarah Morrison. She was on the board until last month. She resigned suddenly. Margaret looked up. I wondered why. She seemed happy with the position. Can you talk to her? I can try. But Alex, you need to document everything. Every interaction, every email, every inspection. If this is retaliation, we might need to take legal action. The word legal made my stomach churn. I didn't want a legal battle. I just wanted to live in my house in peace. But peace wasn't on the agenda. Over the next 2 weeks, I received 17 new violation notices. My house numbers were too small, even though they were identical to every other house on the street. My garden hose was visible from the sidewalk. My doormat was burgundy instead of brown or black. My porch light was LED instead of incandescent, which apparently wasn't specified in the guidelines but Patricia decided was against aesthetic consistency. The fines started piling up, $100 per violation per week. I was looking at over $1,000 by the end of the month for things that were either completely subjective or already in compliance with written rules. I fixed what I could, just to reduce the bleeding. Bought a new doormat, moved my garden hose, replaced my porch light even though LEDs were better for the environment. But some things I couldn't fix without spending thousands. The fence height issue, for instance, would require rebuilding the entire fence. Tom called me on a Wednesday evening. Emergency board meeting tomorrow night. Patricia's calling for a vote to place a lien on your property for unpaid fines. The fines that are mostly bullshit. Yes, but if they vote for it, you'll have a legal problem. Liens affect your credit, your ability to refinance, everything. I showed up to that meeting with a folder of my own. I'd printed every violation, every photo, every measurement. I'd cross-referenced each one with the actual CC and Articus. Out of 23 total violations, only 3 were arguably legitimate, and those 3 were things I'd already fixed. The community center was packed. Word had spread. I recognized neighbors I'd never spoken to, all curious about the drama. Patricia called the meeting to order. We're here to discuss enforcement action against a property owner who has accumulated significant violations and refused to comply. I stood. I've complied with every legitimate violation, and I can prove that most of these citations don't match the written guidelines. Karen scoffed. You've done the bare minimum while arguing every single point. That's not being a good neighbor. Being a good neighbor doesn't mean accepting false accusations. I opened my folder. Violation 14, house numbers too small. The CC and Articus don't specify a size. I measured every house on my street. Mine are identical to the others. Violation 18, garden tools visible from street. There's no rule against that. I've got the entire equipment storage section right here. It only mentions that permanent structures like sheds need approval. Margaret spoke up. Patricia, I've reviewed Alex's documentation. He's right. Most of these violations aren't supported by our governing documents. That's your interpretation, Patricia shot back. No, that's what the documents say, and interpretation isn't enough to justify fines and liens. Daniel Foster, who'd been silent through most of these meetings, cleared his throat. Can I see the violations? I handed him my folder. He read through it slowly, his frown deepening. Daniel wasn't a bad guy, just checked out most of the time. He ran a tech company and treated the HOA board seat as a checkbox on his civic duty list. Patricia, this does seem excessive, he finally said, her composure cracked slightly. We need to maintain standards. If we let one person slide, everyone will think they can ignore the rules. But he's not ignoring rules, Tom interjected. He's following what's actually written. There's a difference between that and enforcing rules that don't exist. The room buzzed with conversation. I could see the dynamics shifting. Some of the neighbors who'd initially seemed supportive of Patricia were whispering to each other, looking uncertain. Karen stood abruptly. I motioned to vote on the lien. Second, Patricia said immediately. The vote went exactly as Tom predicted. Patricia, Karen, and initially Daniel voted yes. Tom and Margaret voted no. 3-2, the motion passed. My house now had a lien against it for $1,500 in fines I didn't legitimately owe. I left that meeting and drove straight to Margaret's law office the next morning. I don't usually practice HOA law, she admitted. But I can refer you to someone who does. And Alex, I'm seriously considering resigning from the board. This isn't what I signed up for. Don't, I said. If you resign, Patricia will just replace you with someone who agrees with her. I need you there. She looked torn. I'll stay for now. But this is getting ugly. The lawyer Margaret referred me to was named Robert Pacheco, a man in his 60s who'd spent 30 years dealing with HOA disputes. His office in downtown Riverside was lined with case files. HOA retaliation cases are tricky, he explained. We have to prove that the enforcement actions were specifically targeting you for an improper purpose, like your vote on the gym expansion. I have screenshots showing Patricia was keeping a list. That helps, but we need more. We need to show a pattern. Are other homeowners being cited for the same violations? I hadn't thought of that. I don't know. Find out. Talk to your neighbors. Document everything. If we can prove selective enforcement, we've got a strong case. I spent the next week canvassing the neighborhood. It felt awkward, knocking on doors of people I barely knew, but the response surprised me. Multiple neighbors had their own stories. Jim Rodriguez, 3 houses down, had the same wrong shade mailbox as me. Never cited. The Hendersons, across the street, had a garden hose visible from the road most days. No violations. Carla Thompson's fence was actually 2 inches taller than mine. Nothing. But then I found others who'd voted against the gym. Linda Park had received 6 violations in the past month. Marcus Webb had been fined for having his garbage can visible, just like me. Susan Chen, no relation, had been cited for her doormat color. I documented all of it. Photos, violation notices they shared with me, voting records. The pattern was undeniable. Robert reviewed everything with growing interest. This is good, this is really good. Patricia's being incredibly stupid about this, which works in our favor. What's our next step? We send a demand letter. We outline the selective enforcement, demand they rescind the fines and remove the lien, and threaten legal action if they don't comply. He leaned back. Most HOAs back down at this stage. They're run by volunteers who don't want the hassle or expense of actual litigation. The letter went out on a Friday. By Monday afternoon, I had my response, a letter from the HOA's attorney denying all allegations and doubling down on the validity of the fines. Well, Robert said when I forwarded it to him, I guess we're doing this the hard way. We filed suit in Riverside County Superior Court, alleging selective enforcement, harassment, and improper governance. The lawsuit named the HOA itself, plus Patricia and Karen individually for their roles in the targeting. The neighborhood exploded. Suddenly, everyone had an opinion. Some people thought I was overreacting, that I should just pay the fines and move on. Others were furious at Patricia for creating this mess. The community forum lit up with arguments. Patricia sent out an email to all homeowners claiming I was attacking the HOA and trying to bankrupt the community with legal fees. Karen started a petition to have me removed from the neighborhood, which wasn't legally possible but demonstrated how far they were willing to go. But something else was happening too. Other targeted homeowners started speaking up. Linda Park posted her violation notices publicly. Marcus Webb did the same. Soon there were 10 of us, all who'd voted against the gym, all who'd been cited for trivial or non-existent violations. Tom called me one evening. There's going to be a special meeting. A group of homeowners collected enough signatures to call for a vote of no confidence in Patricia. Can they do that? It's in the bylaws. Rarely used, but yes. If 51% of homeowners vote to remove her, she's out. The meeting was scheduled for a Saturday afternoon. The community center wasn't big enough, so they moved it to the clubhouse by the pool, which had an outdoor space that could fit everyone. Over 100 people showed up. I'd never seen this many neighbors in one place. The energy was tense, angry, electric. Patricia stood at the front, Karen beside her. This meeting is a waste of time and resources. A small group of disgruntled homeowners are trying to undermine properly executed governance. A man I didn't know stood up. You placed a lien on someone's house for having the wrong doormat. How is that proper governance? All enforcement actions followed established procedures, Patricia replied, but her voice was shaky. Margaret stood. She looked tired. I've been on this board for 3 years. I've never seen enforcement like this until recently, and it's not coincidental that every heavily cited homeowner voted against the gym expansion. That's speculation, Karen snapped. No, it's pattern recognition. Margaret pulled out papers. I went through every violation notice issued in the past year. Before the gym vote, we averaged 20 citations per month across the entire community. After the vote, that number jumped to 60 per month, and 70% of those citations went to people who voted no. The crowd murmured. The math was damning. Daniel Foster stood up slowly. He looked uncomfortable. Patricia, is this true? The statistics are being manipulated, Patricia said, but she wouldn't meet his eyes. Show us your data then, someone called out. I don't have to justify board decisions to a mob. Tom stood. Actually, you do. We're all homeowners here. We're the ones who elected you, and we can remove you. The vote was called. It was done by paper ballot with Tom and two neutral neighbors counting. The room was silent for 20 minutes while they tallied. Finally, Tom returned to the front. The motion to remove Patricia Henderson as HOA president passes with 68% approval. The room erupted. Some people cheered. Others argued. Patricia stood frozen, her face red. Karen was shouting something about irregularities and recounts, but nobody was listening. Patricia grabbed her things and stormed out, Karen following. I watched them go, feeling a strange mix of relief and anxiety. We'd won this battle, but I had no idea what came next. The board reconvened 3 days later to elect a new president. Tom was nominated and won unanimously, with Margaret as vice president. His first action was to meet with me and Robert Pacheco. I want to settle this, Tom said. The HOA was wrong. We need to make it right. Robert laid out terms. All fines rescinded, the lien removed immediately, written acknowledgement that the violations were improper, and reimbursement for my legal fees. Tom agreed to everything. I'll bring it to the board tomorrow. Karen, still on the board, was the only no vote. Daniel and the other members voted yes. By the end of the week, I had a check for $3,500 covering my legal costs and a written apology from the HOA. But the story wasn't over. 2 weeks after Patricia's removal, I got a call from someone named Sarah Morrison. The former board member who'd resigned. I heard what happened, she said. I need to tell you something. We met at the same coffee shop where I'd met Margaret. Sarah was younger than I expected, maybe 35, with nervous energy. I resigned because of Patricia, she began. She was building an alliance on the board before the gym vote. She knew it was going to be close, and she was furious when it failed. An alliance. She convinced Karen that people who voted no were ruining property values. She worked on Daniel, telling him that strong enforcement would protect his investment. She tried to get me on board too, but I refused. I thought the gym was a bad financial decision, and I voted no myself. My coffee sat forgotten. What happened? She started targeting me. Not with violations, but by excluding me from decisions, scheduling meetings without telling me, making me look incompetent in front of other homeowners. It was death by 1,000 cuts. Sarah's hands shook slightly. I have emails. She explicitly talked about making examples of people who voted no. She said if they faced consequences, they'd fall in line for future votes. Why didn't you say anything when you resigned? I was scared. Patricia threatened to sue me personally for breach of fiduciary duty if I caused problems. I know now that was nonsense, but at the time I just wanted out. She slid a USB drive across the table. It's all on here. Every email, every message, every documented conversation. I kept it as insurance, but you need it more than I do. I took the drive. Sarah, thank you. There's one more thing, she hesitated. The gym expansion. Patricia had a financial interest in it. Her brother-in-law owns a construction company. He was going to get the contract. That's why she pushed so hard. That was a whole different level of corruption. I gave the drive to Robert immediately. He reviewed it overnight and called me the next morning, his voice grim. This is bad. Not just for Patricia, but potentially criminal. Self-dealing in an HOA is illegal in California. If she was pushing a project that would financially benefit a family member without disclosing that conflict of interest, she violated state law. What do we do? I need to report this to the district attorney's office. This goes beyond a civil dispute. The next month was a whirlwind. The DA's office opened an investigation. They subpoenaed HOA records, emails, financial documents. They interviewed board members, including Tom and Margaret. They talked to Sarah. They talked to me. Patricia hired a criminal defense attorney. Karen, realizing she might be implicated too, resigned from the board and hired her own lawyer. The investigation found that Patricia had not only failed to disclose her brother-in-law's interest in the construction contract, but she'd also inflated the cost estimates for the gym expansion. The project was priced at $400,000, but comparable projects in other communities cost around $250,000. The difference would have gone to her brother-in-law's company as pure profit. Additionally, they found that Patricia had used HOA funds, about $2,000, for personal expenses. Dinners she claimed were board meetings, but were actually family gatherings. A weekend trip to San Diego she'd labeled as an HOA conference that didn't exist. In September, Patricia Henderson was charged with 3 counts of misappropriation of HOA funds and 1 count of conflict of interest violations. Karen was charged as an accessory for helping cover up some of the expense reports. The case moved slowly through the system. I had to testify before a grand jury, explaining the targeting, the violations, the retaliation. It was exhausting and stressful, but also validating to have official recognition that what happened wasn't just unfair, it was illegal. Meanwhile, life in Riverside Estates slowly returned to normal. Tom proved to be an excellent HOA president. He streamlined the rules, making them clearer and more reasonable. He instituted a policy that all violations had to be approved by at least 3 board members before being issued, preventing any single person from going on a power trip. He also established a resident committee to review enforcement actions and ensure fairness. The pool finally got fixed. The street lights were replaced. The playground got new equipment. Turns out when you're not funneling energy into personal vendettas, an HOA can actually improve a community. I got to know my neighbors properly. Linda Park and I started a community garden. Marcus Webb organized a monthly barbecue. We built something real, something Patricia's forced compliance never could have created. Patricia's trial was scheduled for March. I was listed as a witness, though Robert said the financial crimes were strong enough that my testimony about the targeting might not even be necessary. But then, in February, Patricia's lawyer reached out to the DA with a plea deal. She'd plead guilty to 2 counts of misappropriation and 1 count of conflict of interest. Karen would plead guilty to a reduced charge. In exchange for the pleas, the DA recommended probation, restitution, and community service instead of jail time. The judge accepted the plea in early March. Patricia was sentenced to 3 years probation, ordered to pay back the misappropriated funds plus penalties, totaling $7,000, and to complete 200 hours of community service. She was also permanently banned from serving on any HOA board in California. Karen got 2 years probation and 100 hours of community service. I attended the sentencing. Patricia looked smaller than I remembered, defeated. She made a brief statement apologizing to the community, though it felt rehearsed and empty. Karen cried through her apology, claiming she'd just been following Patricia's lead. The judge was not sympathetic. Homeowners associations are positions of trust. Residents rely on board members to act in the community's best interest. You violated that trust for personal gain and used your position to harass those who disagreed with you. You're fortunate that the DA is recommending probation. In my view, this behavior warranted incarceration. Walking out of that courthouse, I felt a strange sense of closure. Justice hadn't been perfect. I would have preferred actual jail time for what Patricia did, but there was accountability. She'd been caught, prosecuted, and convicted. Her reputation was destroyed. She'd never have power over anyone again. Back in Riverside Estates, the community threw a party to celebrate Tom's first 6 months as president. It was a sunny Saturday, the kind of perfect California weather that made you forget all the bad stuff. Kids played in the pool, adults grilled burgers and hot dogs, someone brought a sound system and played music. Tom found me by the drinks table. "How are you doing, really?" I considered the question. "Better. It was a lot, but we got through it." "You got through it." "You stood up when most people would have just paid the fines and moved on." He clinked his beer against mine. "The community's better because you fought back." Margaret joined us, holding a plate of potato salad. "I heard the sentencing went well as those things go anyway." Patricia and Karen both have criminal records now. Honestly, that matters more to me than anything else. There's an official record that what they did was wrong. "Speaking of records," Margaret said, "I've been documenting everything that happened. The timeline, the retaliation, how it escalated. I'm thinking of writing a guide for other HOA communities about warning signs of board corruption." "That's a great idea," I said. "Maybe it'll help someone else avoid what we went through." The party went late into the evening. At some point, someone started a bonfire in the community fire pit, and people gathered around telling stories. I listened to my neighbors, people I'd lived near for 2 years but barely knew, and realized how much I'd almost lost. Patricia's harassment had pushed me to the edge of wanting to leave, to sell the house and find somewhere without an HOA. But that would have been letting her win. Instead, I'd fought back, and in doing so, I'd helped fix a broken system and built real connections with the people around me. A few weeks after the sentencing, I got a letter in the mail. It was from Patricia. I almost threw it away without reading it, but curiosity won. The letter was handwritten, several pages long. She apologized, genuinely this time, without the courtroom performance. She explained that the gym project had felt like her legacy, a way to prove she was a good leader, and when it failed, she'd taken it personally. She admitted that targeting me and the others was wrong, that she'd let her ego and her desire for control override her judgment. She wrote about her brother-in-law, how he'd convinced her the construction contract was legitimate, that everyone did business with family, that it wasn't really a conflict of interest if the work was good. She saw now how wrong that was. The letter ended with, "I know I can't undo the damage I caused. I made your life hell for months because of a vote on a gym. That's insane when I write it out. I hope you can find peace even if you can't forgive me. You deserved better." I read the letter twice, then filed it away. I didn't forgive her, not really, but I appreciated the acknowledgement. Some people never admit they were wrong. At least Patricia could do that much. Life moved on. My mailbox stayed its slightly faded black, and nobody cared. My lawn grew to whatever height made sense for the weather. My trash can sat by the curb on Tuesday mornings, visible to the entire world, and the earth continued to spin. Tom's reforms transformed the HOA from an adversarial enforcement body into something actually useful. We started community events, organized neighborhood watch programs, created a fund to help elderly residents with yard maintenance. The monthly meetings became something people actually wanted to attend, places to connect rather than battlegrounds. Daniel Foster, finally engaged with the board after the scandal woke him up, proposed a community solar project that would reduce everyone's electricity bills. It passed with 86% approval. We learned as a community that when you work together instead of targeting dissenters, people are willing to support good ideas. I ran into Sarah Morrison at the grocery store in May. She looked healthier, less stressed. "I heard you're thinking about running for the board," she said. The rumor was true. Tom had encouraged me to run in the next election. "Maybe, I figure I've already dealt with the worst possible scenario. It can only get better from here," she laughed. "That's the spirit. Seriously, though, you should do it. The community needs people who'll stand up to bullies." Election day came in June. 3 board positions were open. I ran on a platform of transparency and reasonable enforcement. So did two other neighbors who'd been targeted, Linda Park and Marcus Webb. All three of us won. My first meeting as a board member was surreal. Sitting at that table where Patricia had once held court, where decisions had been made that turned my life upside down, but now with the power to make sure it never happened to anyone else. Tom called the meeting to order. "Welcome to our new board members. Let's get to work." We discussed landscaping bids. We reviewed the budget. We planned the 4th of July block party. It was boring and administrative and absolutely normal, exactly what HOA meetings should be. During the open forum at the end, an older woman named Dorothy raised her hand. "I just want to say thank you, to Alex especially. My son was thinking about buying a house here last year, but when he heard about all the crazy violations and fines, he bought somewhere else. Now I tell him maybe he should reconsider. You've made this a real community again." Several people applauded. It was a small moment, but it meant everything. After the meeting, Linda, Marcus, and I went out for drinks. We toasted to survival, to justice, to the strange journey that had brought us together. You ever wonder what would have happened if you'd just paid the fines? Marcus asked. Like if you'd decided it wasn't worth fighting. I'd thought about that a lot. Patricia would still be president, she'd still be targeting people, the financial stuff wouldn't have been discovered, Karen would still be on the board, it would have gotten worse. "One person can make a difference," Linda said. "That sounds cheesy, but it's true, you made a difference." "We all did," I corrected. Sarah giving me those emails, Tom and Margaret pushing back, every neighbor who voted to remove Patricia. It wasn't just me. But I understood what she meant. Someone had to be the first to say no, to push back, to refuse to accept that this was just how things were. That someone had been me, partly by choice, partly by circumstance. The summer passed peacefully. The 4th of July party was a huge success, bigger than any event the community had hosted before. The solar project broke ground in August. Property values actually increased, not because of strict enforcement, but because people wanted to live in a neighborhood with a functional, fair HOA. I settled into my role on the board. It was work, several hours a week of meetings and emails and reviewing proposals, but it was good work. Purposeful. I was helping maintain a community I'd almost been driven out of. In September, a year after the investigation began, I received a check from the HOA's insurance company. It was a settlement for the stress and damages caused by Patricia's actions. $10,000. The insurance company had paid after the criminal conviction made liability undeniable. I donated half of it to a legal aid fund that helped homeowners fight abusive HOAs. The other half went into savings. Maybe someday I'd use it to move to a place without an HOA at all, but for now, Riverside Estates was home. One evening in October, I was checking my mail when a car pulled up. A woman in her 30s got out, looking around the neighborhood uncertainly. "Can I help you?" I asked. "I'm thinking about buying a house here, the one on Maple Street. I've heard this HOA had some problems last year and I wanted to talk to actual residents before making an offer." She looked embarrassed. "I know that's weird, just approaching a stranger." "Not weird at all, smart actually." I gestured to my front porch. "Want to sit? I'll tell you the whole story." We sat and I explained everything. Patricia's targeting, the retaliation, the investigation, the criminal charges, the reforms. I was honest about the problems and equally honest about how they'd been fixed. "So the people who caused the problems are gone?" she asked. "Gone and legally barred from serving on any HOA board in California. And the current board, fair, transparent, focused on actual community improvement rather than power trips," I smiled. "I'm on it if that gives you any confidence," she laughed. "It actually does. The house on Maple is beautiful, but I was going to walk away if the HOA was a nightmare. Sounds like you all went through the nightmare and came out better." "That's a good way to put it." She bought the house. Moved in November. Came to the first community meeting in December and volunteered to help with the holiday decoration committee. Another neighbor, another person choosing to invest in making Riverside Estates better, December brought the annual HOA elections for president. Tom was running for re-election unopposed. At the meeting where the vote was held, he gave a speech about the past year. 15 months ago, this community was fractured. We had a board that used rules as weapons and forgot that we're supposed to serve residents, not control them. It took courage from Alex and others to stand up and say that wasn't acceptable. He looked around the room. We've come a long way. We've fixed our infrastructure, improved our finances, and most importantly, we've built trust. That's what I want to continue building. The vote was 94% in favor. Tom stayed president. As the meeting wrapped up, Tom announced one final thing. We're establishing an annual award for community service. It'll go to a resident who embodies the values we want in Riverside Estates: integrity, courage, and commitment to the neighborhood. This year's recipient is Alex Chen. I was completely blindsided. People applauded as Tom handed me a plaque. It was simple, wood with an engraved metal plate. Riverside Estates Community Service Award, Alex Chen, for standing up and speaking out. I managed to mumble a thank you, too overwhelmed for anything eloquent. That night, I hung the plaque in my home office next to my desk. It was a reminder of everything that had happened, the worst and the best of community living. The capacity for people to abuse power, but also the capacity for communities to correct course when enough people care. The holidays came and went. Riverside Estates looked beautiful. Every house decorated, the community entrance lit up with tasteful lights that Tom had helped organize. It felt alive in a way it hadn't before, less like a collection of houses and more like an actual neighborhood. January marked exactly 1 year since Patricia's knock on my door with that manila folder of violations. I thought about how much had changed. Patricia was on probation, working retail to pay her restitution, her reputation destroyed. Karen had moved to Arizona, unable to face the community after the conviction. The HOA had reformed its practices and rebuilt its finances. I'd gone from an invisible neighbor to a board member, from someone who skipped meetings to someone who helped run them. Most importantly, I'd learned that silence in the face of injustice, even small-scale HOA injustice, only enables the abusers. Fighting back was hard and stressful and expensive, but it was worth it. Not just for me, but for everyone who came after. Tom and I had coffee one morning in January, reflecting on everything. "Do you regret any of it?" he asked. All the stress, the legal battle, the time it consumed, I thought about it carefully. No, I regret that it was necessary. I wish Patricia had just been reasonable from the start. But I don't regret fighting back. That was the right choice. You changed this community, you know that, right? We changed it, all of us together, he smiled. Fair enough, team effort, but you were the catalyst. I liked that word better than hero or whistleblower or any of the other terms people had used. I hadn't set out to transform anything. I just refused to accept unfair treatment, and that refusal had sparked a chain reaction that eventually brought down a corrupt board president. February brought the 1-year anniversary of Patricia's guilty plea. The local newspaper did a follow-up story on HOA corruption cases in Riverside County. Our situation was featured prominently, used as an example of how homeowners could successfully challenge abusive boards. The reporter interviewed me, Tom, and Sarah Morrison. The article detailed Patricia's targeting, the selective enforcement, the financial crimes, and the eventual conviction. It ended with a section on reforms and how Riverside Estates had become a model for good HOA governance. The article got picked up by a statewide news site, then a national HOA reform organization. Suddenly, I was getting emails from homeowners across the country dealing with similar situations, asking for advice. I couldn't help them all, but I tried. I shared Robert Pacheco's name for those in California. I explained the importance of documenting everything. I encouraged them to find allies on their boards, to speak up at meetings, to not suffer in silence. Some of them won their battles, some lost. But they fought, and that mattered. In March, 2 years after that first knock on my door, I was gardening in my front yard when a familiar car pulled up. My stomach dropped. It was Patricia. She got out slowly, looking nervous. "Hi, Alex. I know I'm probably the last person you want to see." I stood, pulling off my gardening gloves. "What do you want, Patricia?" To apologize, in person, without lawyers or judges or anyone else. She took a breath. "I was wrong, about everything. The way I treated you, the other homeowners, the financial stuff with my brother-in-law. I let my ego destroy something good. I waited. She'd said sorry before in the letter, but I wanted to hear what else she had to say. I've been in therapy, court-ordered at first, but I'm still going because it helps. I'm working on understanding why I needed control so badly, why I took your no vote as a personal attack." She looked at my house, at the mailbox that had started everything. "You were right to fight back. If more people had the courage you did, people like me wouldn't get away with what I did for so long. It was a good apology, genuine, specific, taking full responsibility. I appreciate you coming here," I said finally. "I don't know if I forgive you yet, maybe someday. But I appreciate the apology." She nodded. "That's fair, more than fair. I just wanted you to know that I see what I did, really see it, and I'm sorry." She turned to leave, then paused. "For what it's worth, I'm glad you won. The community needed someone like you." She drove away, and I stood there processing. Closure was weird. It didn't feel like movies made it seem, some big emotional release. It was just a conversation, an acknowledgement, a small step toward putting the past fully behind me. I went back to gardening. My lawn was slightly uneven. My flowers were a mix of colors that probably didn't meet any aesthetic standard, and my mailbox was still that same faded black. And it was perfect. That evening, the board met to discuss next year's budget. We allocated funds for pool maintenance, street repairs, and a new community garden space. We talked about hosting monthly movie nights in the park during summer. We reviewed a proposal from a young couple who wanted to start a little library box system throughout the neighborhood. Everything was normal, boring, functional. Exactly what an HOA should be. As I drove home from that meeting, I thought about the journey from that angry knock on my door to this peaceful evening. Patricia had tried to force me out, to punish me for disagreeing with her vision. Instead, she'd accidentally activated someone who wouldn't back down, who'd fight not just for himself but for the principle that HOAs should serve communities, not control them. Her alliance, the one she'd carefully built with Karen and Daniel, had crumbled under scrutiny. Meanwhile, a different kind of alliance had formed. Neighbors supporting each other, board members prioritizing fairness, a community coming together to reject corruption. One resignation, Sarah Morrison's, had provided the evidence that brought everything to light, but it wasn't just that. It was Tom standing up in meetings, Margaret refusing to go along with unjust citations, Daniel finally paying attention and voting his conscience, every neighbor who signed the petition to remove Patricia, every person who voted for reform candidates. It was a collective victory, but it had started with one person refusing to accept injustice. That person had been me, almost by accident, but I'd seen it through. Riverside Estates taught me that communities are fragile things. They can be poisoned by petty tyrants and transformed by people willing to push back. The difference between a nightmare HOA and a functional one often comes down to whether anyone is brave enough to say no. I'd said no. We'd all said no eventually, and we'd won. My house sat quiet as I pulled into the driveway, my faded black mailbox catching the streetlight. I walked past it into my home, that plaque hanging on the wall, a reminder of everything that had happened and everything we'd overcome. Tomorrow there would be more meetings, more decisions, more work to keep the community running smoothly. But tonight, I was just a guy in his house, in his neighborhood, finally at peace. Patricia had built an alliance to target me. We'd built a better one to stop her. And in the end, that made all the difference.